Ryan was the best study partner ever. He might be the reason that I made it all the way out of the MBA program. I don't know. We'll see.
All right, so Adam, tell us your backstory. Before you started Artemis Immersive, give us the path up to that point.
Sure. Started off in accounting, realized I was not an accountant. I had started working for GSK in one of their audit functions. Had an amazing opportunity to network into a commercial role. I got to be a product manager for one of the brand lines. I got to do one of the direct-to-consumer product launches. Ultimately, just kind of started to burn out a bit. Decided I want to go back and get my MBA. I did that. You were there. Again, that's why I'm here. And then I took a career path change and went into clinical research. Quintiles at the time, now IQVIA. Worked there for probably 8 years, started in clinical operations side, and then got bit by the technology bug about 6 years ago. Eventually I was head of product design there, and then we parted ways in April of last year, and my wife and I started this startup the next month in May. So here I am.
That's an amazing story, and with a big transition too, right? From working from a big company to switching and going out on your own.
Yeah, I mean there was a lot in there. If you want an awkward moment, show up to a marketing interview with accounting resume, right? It's they're like you lost, or but yeah, it was a very large transition in a lot of ways. Some really good, all of it was good. Some of it was less painful than others. I'll say that. Obviously, right, working in a steady company that you don't have to worry about finding payroll every week, etc. It just comes. There's certainly benefits to that. The speed at which you can operate outside of that model, though, is amazing. 9 months, we've done 3 conventions now. We're getting to pitch at Venture Connect next week. For when you get the right team of people who've been in healthcare, or I assume really any industry, that work together, that know the space really well, and are passionate, you can do some really cool stuff. You can also not get paychecks. So there's this balance there of being really, really, early on in it. We decided not to go out for funding initially, right? We wanted to build, we wanted to build at least a prototype, start to establish ourselves what would be our beachhead, et cetera, before we got down that path. We are thinking and hoping that next week we'll start an equity raise for us. So we've been bootstrapped to this point, which has been great and interesting also in some ways, but it's the journey that we're on. So yeah, those are like night and day differences in terms of still stressful, right? It's still like all the things that being passionate about a career is, just different. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And so, to some degree, what Artemis grew out of was things that were happening in an innovation lab at
IQVIA.
Yep. And so, can you talk about sort of what was going on there, and then I guess there was a shift in maybe organizational focus or funding, and then how that grew into what you did.
In fairness, the shift in organizational focus was probably my own, much more so than IQVIA's. Large companies in healthcare get to do some amazing things. I think it's also very easy when you're looking at potential rough economic times to kind of tighten down the model, take more conservative bets on what market you're going to play in, et cetera. I don't have a lot of time for that. I don't know. It just feels like a waste. And I got to build such an amazing team at IQVIA, and we had just started to get into, okay, now let's see what we can do with a random concoction of AR and VR devices. Can I create content, send it to your phone that's also the same as that's in a VR headset? Really passionate about patients. You're not going to get patients sharing a headset in a hospital waiting room. I guess you could, but very unlikely or very dire circumstances. And so we started to adopt this practice of looking at how can I create an experience that goes across different mediums or peripheral devices, whether it's their phone, whether it's a desktop computer, whether it's AR, VR, headset, etc. And so, we just started to, really work together and start to think about what are the areas that we wanted to tackle, and then we had a separation event, and then I went out and hired my team the next day, or a few days later. But yeah, so we were just at that point where we started to really kind of impact and, think about, it does destroy a ton of obstacles or barriers to innovation, right? As these different devices continue to develop, people get more and more crafty with how they use them, et cetera. And it's like, we were like right there, and we were getting to really make some, plans about making a bunch of progress. And so I think we probably just got the taste for it, and then for myself, at least personally, there was no way I was going back. So if that was on my own, it was on my own.
And I'd like to poll the audience a little bit. And so by a show of height of your hand, how much do you how familiar are you with things like augmented reality, virtual reality? So all the way up if you're like really familiar, half the way up if you're okay with it, and maybe just like really low if you don't really know. All right. Those hands look pretty low. so maybe we'll
you got like the third of like...
Yeah, people are aware, yeah. So maybe we should start at the beginning. So for augmented and virtual reality, I had mentioned earlier, and you can tell I drank the Kool-Aid, that I believe that it's going to change everything. I believe it's going to change, when I was at UNC for 14 years, and thinking about instructional technology. And actually it was through the School of Medicine and thinking how we could serve medical needs for teaching physicians, for teaching medical students and people, nursing students and other students, but also how we could do better research with all this stuff, and so it's education, research, clinical care, all of those things. But I also have this background where I was in business. I got a master's degree in Buddhism, and so I have all these, I really see, it fits everywhere. It fits in the humanities, it fits in history, it fits in chemistry. And so I think about it as this general purpose thing, that generally when you give it somebody the first example, it's like, oh, did you know that a nurse could practice, intubation with this, like a physical process that you would do with your hands? They'd be like, oh, that's interesting. And then, well, did you know that same nurse could practice, dealing with a difficult patient and having the emotional side of things? It's like, oh, that's interesting. Did you know that same nurse could go inside the bloodstream and see what it's like to see these things that otherwise would be impossible to see? So, as these examples start to pile up, people start to really open their minds. And I think one of the things for me is, I don't want to take up too long of a rant here, I'm going to pass it back to you, but is you almost have to think of what's the magic version of whatever you do. So if you're a janitor, maybe the magic version is when you're sweeping the floor, you're cleaning up coins. If you're a surgeon, maybe the magical version of what you do is seeing through someone's body, so you're cutting into the right place. If you're a teacher, maybe the magical version is taking somebody on an amazing place. So anyway, that's a long segue that you could react to, but to me, you could see that I get excited about this technology. Right. And there was a moment for you that you got excited, and so can you tell me about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions in there. I agree with all of it. I think sometimes it's not even about the magical way to do something, but it's the efficient way to do something. As I've started to network with friends, former colleagues, people that I'm begging to make investments, etc., a lot of times it's their first exposure to having someone show up with 3 different types of headsets and a 3D display. And, you usually kind of go through the same conversations about well, my neck's been hurting because this monitor is too wide and it's not tall enough, and I could put these other 2 monitors beside each other, and I'll usually be like, well, you could probably turn it up. So none of that's helpful though, right? And they're pretty quickly well, can I pull up all my desktop windows and the headset? And yes, you can, and if you get it dialed in just right and you do it every day, it would help you look at things better. The technology is still evolving, right? You're probably not going to spend 8 hours in a headset straight at this point. I think that probably changes pretty drastically in the future. But I mean, it does open up so many doors in terms of specific areas. So, in healthcare, not a lot of people know this, but essentially with VR or AR, you're using game engines, you're using 3D software. And so whether or not the headset or whatever XR device it is just like the display layer, right? So those same the library of content or programs applications, you can adjust them slightly and get them to work in all these different display technologies. And I think that just opens up phenomenal doors. Okay, so we just went through the telehealth revolution. Apologies if anyone's in telehealth in the room. It did help solve a problem. I think also a lot of people were very underwhelmed, probably because people immediately started imagining all the amazing things it's going to do for them, and maybe that wasn't realistic. But a lot of them are it's a Zoom call that your doctor's on the other end of, right? And yes, you do get to see their face, and that is better, and you probably do connect more than if you just pick up the phone and call them. But like, I don't know, I felt like we were promised all this crazy stuff, right? Where you'd be like getting medical charts, and I don't know, that they're floating or they're doing something, and whatever that something is, it's solving a problem. At least that was, the thought in my head, but it didn't happen. I don't know what happened.
And it seems to be some of the things you've come to, and you could, is this a touch screen? Do you want to walk us through, or is it a video blank?
Yeah, no, this is just a video of some of the different apps that we have. I'll just kind of leave it playing in the background. And then I'll kind of take everybody over. We can do a little demo there.
Sure.
Do we want to?
Yeah, you're ready.
You want to go now? Okay. Yeah. So essentially, this is the first of our products that we've done in the medical context. It's called BoxScan. We initially started as we were getting this to a place where it was functional and it was automated and it didn't have to have someone in the middle of it, ensuring that certain processes ran. We needed, what's that?
I'll just let people see what you could say.
Oh yeah. We needed to be able to make some money, right? So instead of going directly to the doctor's office, that was a relationship and a reputation that I didn't want to jeopardize, kind of a one-way road. So we started working with personal injury attorneys, which was an interesting pivot. Not what I expected myself to be doing, but it allowed us to sort of practice for showing a patient, what they might be seeing to understand their healthcare, right? So a juror that, is in a trial for personal injury litigation, right? Very unlikely that they are a medical professional. If there's a serious injury, lawyer might pay to bring in an expert witness that's very likely a radiologist or a neurosurgeon or something. They probably charge between $1 and $5 grand a day to get them to do it. Who knows how long your trial goes, right? It gets really expensive really quick, and then at the end of the day, you've still got a person pointing to a black and white image that probably looks like an ink blot to someone who hasn't been trained in radiology or hasn't seen a lot of it.
And so they say, picture is worth 1,000 words. I think the 3D is worth more than that right now. Absolutely. Yeah. And it does seem that it's almost amazing, actually. Obviously, our bodies are three-dimensional, but almost every medical imager scan that I've ever seen has been two-dimensional. And so not only is this three-dimensional, but it's also, how do you get all those different colors in there? So you can turn on and off layers, right? You could say, I want to see the lungs without the ribs. I want to see this without that, because
exactly. So yeah, this is set up for volumetric spaces, so it's going to highlight the lungs. I realized that I picked the smallest screen up here to try to show everyone, so apologies. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. I'll pass it around. You can grab the models, right? You can move them around to position them. This is actual torso, an entire torso. So what we'll do is we'll take all the individual slices that makes up the scan, we render them together, and then we can apply different lenses, if you will, that react to certain materials in the body represented by the scan differently, right? So not exactly the same thing as like a fluoroscopy, but the idea is that you can hone in on different elements of the body and brighten or raise those and suppress others without any kind of interventional invasive procedure. So instead we have one set up here for more volumetric spaces, so you can see lungs. We've got a few others. This one's set up so it focuses mostly on muscle tone. So like it's the same person, it's the same scan, that's their muscles, they're in far better shape than I am. Maybe you're trying to focus on the ribs and the skeletal structure. So we've got some that are set up for to highlight those as well. So it gets, if you're trying to leave context, right? If you're trying to show that a rib was broken and maybe punctured a lung, you're probably going to have to, you want to see the lung, and then you don't want to see the lung because you want to see if the rib went into it, and so the flexibility to, for lack of a better term, get creative or manipulate it in many different ways to, see the thing you want.
And maybe from the straight-on angle, maybe it's not obvious, but if you rotate it to a certain degree, you're like, okay, clearly that's sticking up into the wrong place. Or...
Yeah, and there are 3D MRI and CT scanners that are out there. Most of them that I've seen aren't fully rendering the entire thing. It's a 3D chunk of an image. It's very expensive equipment that I've seen ortho clinics that'll have, and it'll do it kind of on the spot. I've never seen anything that does the different color features and brings that in. So we're pretty excited about it.
There's a few things that I like about this. One of them is, people talk about the human body. So if you're going to become, you're studying anatomy, you're going to learn about the human body, but there's no single human body. There's people who are different sizes and genders and the whole thing. Everybody's different. And so this is rendering somebody's specific medical data, right? Like you took this from a scan and were able to render it from existing scans that exist in the medical system, and you're able to turn it into this.
Yeah, this is a person. We've got one here we just did for Synapse for the convention that we were at. We get I don't think I can cycle through it without the keyboard on it. But so there's we worked with the NIH. They gave us a database of their, they were doing a cancer study, and we pulled the image in there. You can see very, very plainly, what's going on with it and where. I'll just show you. Let me pull it up.
Well, and what's interesting about that, I think, is again, some of the non-obvious parts, at least to me, is when you start, you're like, oh, I can see why a doctor would want this, an oncologist or a radiologist or something like that. I think you've mentioned that actually those people who like it the least, they've already realized how to work with the system as it is. But if you think about every other, so like you think about describing to a patient why this surgery is important, communicating to other people on your team when you're planning for something that's about to happen. They're training people on how to do this, whether they're nurses and physicians, and all the different people who have to train on that.
Yeah. And so, like, as you're working with someone's actual anatomy, right, you can start to see a very different view on organs, different anatomical systems, etc. Again, I should have brought a big screen over here, but I'll pass this around, or you guys can come check it out. If you're trying to really understand the image, probably just looking at it from the outside isn't going to move the needle. So we've got typical slices that you would see set up. Got one here for transverse, so it's coming up from the bottom and obviously rotated. But if you want to start looking at different pieces of the anatomy or different sections, right, you can look at it. And that one's dead. Awesome.
And up on the screen here, we're seeing some video. This is the first thing that I'd seen that you had done. It's more kind of like a VR sort of environment where someone's there in a virtual space, and then maybe a professor of some sort could bring something up like a heart or a model, and then have it there in the center, rotated around. And then in all those seats, there could be people who were sort of attending and then talking to each other, talking to the professor, understanding in that way. That's a totally different way of using this technology. Could you talk about the different modes?
Yeah, and so it's all running off of the same content. So it's not, I'm happy to say it's no longer, it can be set up. It's set up for 10 people. It's a functioning app. But it's kind of what I see as a way that we could push that telehealth a little bit further along. So if you wanted to plan a surgical procedure with 10 experts from various different fields from all over the world, right, they can all kind of be sitting around this amphitheater and all experiencing the same data set that's being manipulated, or surgical planning that's being done. Everyone can look in and see it. Maybe you're meeting with a few different specialists because there's a condition that you're fighting that's very advanced, or maybe you're teaching a medical school, or start to get pretty quickly to see that there's so many applications for it. You know, it's got to be right. No one's going. Most people aren't jumping in a headset to see something in a headset, right? They're jumping in a headset to solve a problem, or they're jumping, you know, into a computer app to solve a problem. So, I think working out exactly like, can we get to a world where, you know, you're seeing a digital twin of yourself as you're talking with your doctor? You can see his face. He can pull up other scans. He can pull up, you know, what the anatomy is supposed to look like. He can pull up your latest blood results, you know, and start to sort of immerse himself in all the different data points of the health. We've been, as I said earlier, we were bootstrapped, and so we're trying to start to land use cases that are outside of FDA, class 2, class 3, class 4 devices, right? So it's set up for visualization and communication right now. You know, we've got some concepts for analysis, and so for those that don't know, when you move into analysis, it's usually when you start to escalate what type of device class it is, when the software is actually making the recommendation. You know, software saying, you may want to check this out, doctor, because it looks funny. So we're not there yet, again, because that's when we start going through like a longer FDA filing process, et cetera. Doesn't mean we aren't planning for it and thinking about it and kind of getting ready for it. You know, it's always a mix of being really excited to push it really hard, and then also like not get too carried away that you can't deliver on that first thing that you did before building on it.
Yeah,
So,
and healthcare is one of these industries that if people are coming from the outside, it's unbelievable the amount of complexity. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so for instance, I often hear people, I've got this great idea, you know, and let's say you do have a great idea, and that it would make people healthier. And you're like, this is going to be wonderful, right? It's like, well, who's going to buy it? Well, patients don't buy it unless the prescription, you know, the doctor prescribes it. And the doctor doesn't prescribe it unless, you know, somebody says that they're going to get reimbursed for it. And they're not going to get reimbursed for it unless it goes up the stack between there's the doctor, there's the patient, there's the hospital, and what they will do, and then what they're getting reimbursed for, and then what the laws are about it. And then you go to another place, the FDA, where you're saying, you know, this class of device, this class of device, this class of device, and it just seems like, you know, a very large company who's been through all this before and has like a long runway and stuff like that can handle all this. They've got all the relationships and lots of money to make it through the difficult periods, but it's daunting for somebody who's coming from an entrepreneurial perspective. You had the benefit of being in the space a little bit before, so could you talk about what that's like to come into healthcare?
there are certainly benefits and advantages that I had in my last role that I don't have now, right? Like, you know, even from expertise, or you've got a team of regulatory specialists or people who know specific conditions or therapeutic areas really, really well. And you've got a pretty advanced question. It'll take 30 seconds for the right person to answer it. But like, it's hard to have that right person to know them and be able to, you know, ping them on a computer or whatever. So there's that. I many times felt like I was making more PowerPoints than progress, which was driving me nuts. And eventually I got up to a place where I wasn't sitting still so well. You know, it's not what I wanted to spend my life doing. But that said, there were lots of benefits there. I think there's just as many disadvantages. It's probably about, you know, which individual's situation is better. But yeah, I mean, the reason we did the personal injury thing, right, is to start getting some early revenue coming in, getting some more people excited about this could actually be a company. You know, he didn't lose his mind and quit a career corporate gig to, you know, go sell headsets, right? And so we did that, right? And then we've now moved into this space where the regulation is much, much lower because most of that functionality is out of scope. And then, you know, from there, you take one more step. There's a million things to do, and there's a million things that can go wrong. There's a million things to be constantly learning, sure, but inherently it's not because a place is bigger or smaller that, you know, does it, right?
So one of the benefits of this technology is general purpose, right? There's all kinds of different problems you could solve for it, all kinds of potential applications. And I never would have guessed the personal injury law as being one, but it makes total sense when you think about it from that perspective. Like that pivot, it seems like a classic startup pivot, right? You've got a certain runway, you've only got so much money, you're bootstrapped, you're doing it yourself, you got people on the payroll, you're building amazing stuff, but you really need to get to that revenue rolling in. Could you talk a little bit about the pivot?
Hey mom, changing healthcare. Hey mom, I'm following a personal injury attorneys around, trying to see if I can help them help their victims. It's a different world.
Chasing ambulance chasers.
You know, I think we'll be successful. Not that we have, or not that it's guaranteed. But I mean, I think that part of any successful startup has to have a bit of, like, you've got to learn to eat some crow, and you've got to do some things that you wouldn't normally want to do, or get outside of your comfort zone, and try to, see things a little bit differently than you always had. But yeah, it was a change. I think, it solved the problem. It allowed us to get the tech further along, and we're here today, releasing this next week, present. So
Nice.
grateful for it,
Yeah.
and all of its joys.
Should we go back there, or should we continue to stand here?
Yeah, that sounds great.
We'll go head
You
back
want to?
further. Sorry for the camera.